What happens when a budget-conscious college kid hands us a classic Mustang and says, just make it sound like something people will remember? This isn't your typical boomer restoration build. No bolt-ons, no chrome kits, no Flowmasters, just a humble 289 and a pair of Megaphones, and us trying to squeeze out the real soul of a car that still smells like vinyl and old gas. We're working with a 1965 Mustang Coupe, one of the most iconic starter classics of the muscle car world. But this isn't a GT350 clone or some track prep bruiser. It's the kind of car you see at a Cars and Coffee and think that it's almost there. The kind that needs help telling the story before the owner even touches a camshaft. Now here's the thing. When it comes to classic Mustangs, everyone's got an opinion, and most of them were forged in the comfort of a folding chair parked behind a car with a laminated mod plaque on a Wednesday evening cruise night. Crushed bends, chambered mufflers, glass packs, the stuff that makes everything sound like a tin shed falling off of a trailer. But the truth? These engines have way more class than the muscle car label gives them credit for, if you know how to bring it out. So if you're still clinging to that mild steel horror show from 1993, do yourself a favor and comment, like, and subscribe. It won't fix your exhaust, but it might validate our fragile egos. The challenge: build an exhaust worthy of a GT350 tribute for an enthusiast who's not cutting corners, just betting big on where it counts. He's not a fabricator, he's not made of money, but he knows a great exhaust can make this car feel finished before it really is. It has to be impressive without being obnoxious, aggressive, but not like it's compensating for something. This car isn't finished, but until it is, it can be the headline. All right, so we finally got the opportunity to show you guys what we can do with the classic American muscle car. This time, a Ford Mustang that's got a 289 in it. Now, the small block Fords actually usually end up sounding pretty good as is. Now, the customer was inspired by a Shelby GT350 and was looking to get the feel of something similar. So we came up with something for him, but he kind of threw a curveball at us by installing his own headers. Now, when he showed up initially for the install, these headers weren't in, but he told us he was going to be putting some budget headers on this car. The good thing, they are stainless. But the bad thing is, if you take a look here, these tri-wise seem to be bumping into quite a few components. We've got the clutch linkage there and the idler arm for the steering. Now this is a big hurdle, mostly because once we get this exhaust all done, we always want to know if it's not touching, not rubbing, not expanding against something. And being that it has so many contact points already before we even start on something that we didn't even do, we might have to fix this beforehand. What I'm interested in trying are, what do the Megaphones sound like on the small block Fords, where we're gonna fit them, and how we're gonna get them back out the side. So we're gonna have to get a little tricky here and use a muffler that we haven't actually used, but it should be interesting to see how this actually comes out. All right, so looks like there's a lot of room under here, but X-pipe placement doesn't look that straightforward, even with all this room. I mean, ideally, we'd want it somewhere about here. We need a crossover, and we need to have it in the middle. Pretty much really only here is gonna work. You think you could fit the Megaphones before we have to get to this?
Yeah, once I get the X pipe, in place, kind of figured out here, I'm gonna have to like open up the X pipe so that it just widens the whole system out. We'll run through here, and hopefully, in this section, we'll be able to have the Megaphones, and then from there we can go into the mufflers.
Back in and out, yeah.
Back in and out, yeah.
So more or less straightforward. What's interesting though is the diameter that we're using. So keeping the diameter small coming off the headers and then utilizing steps along the way is gonna help us get a more classic Shelby GT350 sound. So that's the idea. Now, if you've heard some of the small block Fords from that era, they sound incredible. In fact, we've had a Shelby GT350, the original one, in the shop before, and let me tell you, they really do sound amazing. The idea here is to try to bring out as much of that out of this little engine. The problem being though is if you go too big, you get back into that territory that a lot of Fords normally sound like. So we're trying to do something a little different, which is going to be using smaller diameter pipe and then stepping it up slowly along the way to increase the pulses in the exhaust system, changing the tone slightly. So Forgive the drawing. These aren't tri-wise, but you understand that they're headers. We get to that X, that little baby X, and then immediately we're going to go into the 2-inch megaphones to start, which is gonna cut back. That's gonna be our first step to 2.5 before we go into the mufflers. Now, this is a unique design. A lot of classic cars that use side pipes use these, or if they put them up in an area where they don't have a lot of room to get back in and out, but one in, one out, it makes a U inside there. Honestly, they don't have the best sound profile because the exhaust is taking that turn inside of there. They end up doing a lot of muffling because of that turns, because not only do you have the perforated material in there to absorb the sound, but you also have the bend absorbing the sound, changing the profile. So it's gonna kill a lot of the theater of the car, but we did step it up to push a little bit more through there, another step, and then coming out of here, we're gonna utilize the last step because a 2.5-inch pipe coming out the side just doesn't look aggressive enough. That last step is gonna be 3-inch coming out, which should give it a tough look. So this is the plan. It's just a matter of getting it under the car now. All right, so we've heard this thing open headers, and now we've heard it with the X pipe and the megaphones. And is there a big difference? It sounds pretty good. We are headed in the right direction. The next hurdle is going to be, how do we keep all of that personality without dialing it back too much? Because you still got to be able to live with this car, drive it around, not get pulled over every 10 seconds, not have a drone shake the cabin, but you kind of want it to sound pretty close to that when you get on it. So we got to fit those mufflers in here, that U-bend, and get those things back out. I think that's the recipe, but we are on the right track. This thing sounds mean. Now this is a less commonly used item from Vibrant's catalog. Typically don't use something like this, but what it is, you'll notice 2 entrances on this side, no exits on this side, which means it is a single in, single out with a U inside. Now let's see if we can get a look inside of here. It's a perforated core packing material, but if you look at the very end, you'll see a U piece that is not perforated, but it bends the airflow right back around. Now that bend itself will take care of some of the muffling. I would say that this would probably end up being quieter than your typical single in, single out muffler. For the packaging constraints and the side pipes we want to use, it's going to be perfect for trying to get the volume reduction that we're looking for, but then get this to where we need it to be for those side pipes. All right, so getting these tips right means a few things have to be done in order to achieve what I'm looking for. And what I'm looking for is something reminiscent of the GT350R, the 65, where you can see the pipe pretty much going straight out the side. You want the whole length to be as straight as possible, but in order to do that, it means the exhaust and where we had to place everything got a little bit tricky. I'm going to show you a few of those challenges. You can see, we'll start at the end first, which is this slash cut tip. We're trying to keep it with the body line, have it tuck out a little bit. The original GT350R had more of a round cut and more straight centered. So this is kind of a blend of the two, both the regular and the R versions. But I'll show you why this is actually challenging. Now underneath here, if you look, we've got the muffler in this position. We're hanging quite a bit lower than where the exhaust came out at. Now the reason for that is in order to get this angle straight and coming out at the angle I want, so when you see it from the side, it just looks more finished, we have to keep this away from the body. So we have space up here, but not so much back here. And what that creates is this needing to be lower in order to hit that angle that we're coming at. So this is just a matter of a basically a straight bend where this is level. Now we could have done something where this was tucked up higher and we have it jog down and then jog over and then hit to the straight section, but it just doesn't look as finished and as industrial if we were to do it that way. This is much cleaner, much straighter, and I think it's going to have a better visual impact when all said and done. And they're going to be safe still because this is still lower than the differential bottom. The axle will go up, but the height between the wheel, the tire, that'll never change. So they're going to be up high enough where they should be safe. and there'll be no issues. All right, so we ran into an issue. Now, I was a little concerned about these mufflers being that on their own, they'll do a good job killing most of the volume. But with this bend in here, I haven't really used these too often. And honestly, this thing is way too quiet. It sounded so good before the muffler, and now it's basically killing all of that volume. All right, Cody, these mufflers, we got to come out of here with them. Rather than trying to experiment with maybe getting a ultra quiet on there, something smaller. I don't want to use anything chambered. What I'm thinking is, let's just ditch these all together and see how they sound. I don't know if we could find a radius tight enough that we can just loop this back. I don't really want to get into any, what are they called? Johnny joints, miter cuts. I just think that'll kind of kill the work that you've put into it, the look of it. So maybe we can dig up like a tight radius bend and somehow just get this thing looped back in, throw another V-band in here, and then essentially have something that you could drop down and install in. Do you think you'd be able to come up with something like that? I don't.
Yeah, there's a couple options that I've seen. You know, they have these like donuts that are just a big circle. You cut out the radius that you need, and then you can put it in place. And from there, if he wants it to be quiet, we can add like a V-band in here, and then just have the muffler part removable and have the radius tube, you know, installed. It should be pretty easy.
I think that'll also give us an idea of how loud this thing's going to be, because honestly, while it sounded really good coming out of these megaphones, it wasn't insanely loud.
Right.
It's hard to tell underneath the car, but it seemed like if we finish it off with some exhaust pipe, it might have been something a younger guy getting into cars could potentially drive around and like have fun in, but stay off the throttle when he's around cops. So, and I think people kind of expect older muscle cars to be loud too. So
Absolutely.
this is definitely too quiet though. So
Yeah.
we got to come up with something quick. We're going to look through the parts catalog, try to see what we can come up with, but hopefully we can find what Cody's talking about. And if we can, we're basically going to try it and see if we can get some of that volume back in this thing. All right, so we're mulling this over and trying to figure out what exactly we can do that's quick in order to get this thing sounding a little bit louder, a little bit more exciting, because those mufflers definitely killed it too much. Now, the idea that we were initially coming up with was to use something with a tight radius bend, and this is what we found, a donut. As you can see, this is two pieces, and it's basically just formed. Looks like they grind off this outside weld, but we were going to cut it down. The issue is this radius on the 2.5 here, that's about as tight as we can find it. If you guys know of a tighter radius 2.5 bend, let me know in the comments, but this is as tight as we could find it. And as you can see here, we are still too wide to be able to make this jump that we'd need to just loop this back. We'd want something that we could V-band in place so that way he could just seamlessly switch the mufflers if he wanted to. But that got me thinking, maybe it's a little too complicated. The idea here is that he would have the ability to switch out two, but then we need to V-band the muffler tip. And there isn't a whole lot of space in between these two for two V-bands. So we'd have to offset them, but you know, that would make things a little clunky, a little hard to use. But what if we just remade the tip? Well, then all of this would be essentially waste to get this on here. The bend would need to be different. We couldn't use exactly this for that, or we'd cut it off and scrap the muffler. I mean, there's a few ways to go with this. But what I was thinking was, I'm actually surprised by how tame this thing is. And I don't mean tame in the sense of the tone or the pitch. I mean tame in the sense of, I'm standing underneath here, outside of it, without earplugs on, not having to cover my ears. This thing might actually be livable for an enthusiast. So I gave the customer a call and gave him the idea. I said, what if we just went straight pipe? Now, I'm not a big fan of straight pipes typically, but the tone is pretty right on with this thing. And if we do this bend right, it might be something that an enthusiast, and not, you know, someone who's looking at a daily drive or live with this car every day, but what this car is something you could take to meets, take out for a nice cruise, enjoy it. Might be able to take this and drive it and be completely fine with it most of the time. Maybe there's a few annoying spots, but more or less he's liking the car. So I think that's what we're gonna do. We're actually just gonna loop this back here, use this bend, which will allow us to kick this over, not have to worry about being this tight, because if we had to be this tight, we'd probably have to cut this down. This bend would get ugly, it'd be all miter cut. This will keep this thing nicely smooth and flowing, allow us to go to the side pipes the same, and then we'll ditch that muffler altogether and credit him back the price of the muffler, whatever savings. So having a little bit of savings in there will probably be a nice benefit too, but I think that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna hear how this thing sounds, and hopefully we keep all of what we're hearing after the megaphones when it's coming out the sides. All right, the mufflers are back out. We've made the correction and the side pipes are in place, and I think they look great, but we gotta hear if this thing is too loud now. Cody, go ahead and start it up. All right, it's a little loud, and it's right on that edge. I'm gonna need to drive it to see if this 3-speed transmission can keep it out of its area that makes this thing overbearing, but I just kind of feel like these cars, especially old classic muscle cars, kind of have that Harley theme where no one really cares if they're loud. They kind of expect them to be loud. So I think this might pass because it sounds so good the way it is. It's basically straight piped at this point. But if it's annoying to drive, then I'd say we'd have to do something else. Now you might be noticing we're on the dyno, and I've taken the time to strap the car down. We're about to run it. Now, why are we running it if we didn't get pre-dynos? Because this thing drove in with open headers and I didn't want to start a fire. Because I'm nice. I want you guys to be able to hear this thing. Another opportunity for you guys to get to hear the symphony that I think this thing's making. And maybe this will quell some of your guys' apprehension on the numbers on our dyno. Old muscle cars, they don't make what you have heard they make. Something like this, a 289, if it breaks 150 horsepower, I'm gonna be shocked. So let's see what it does. And there it is. What I was expecting, 145 horsepower, a mid-range peaky horsepower graph there, looking like it's fallen off towards the tail end of the run. I'd bet that be in timing or airflow, but if you look at this air-fuel ratio, it's running on a little rich side. Now I bet if we lean this thing out a little bit and maybe check to see what kind of timing this was running, what kind of fuel the owner was using, we might be able to squeeze about maybe another 10 horsepower on it. But that wasn't the point. The point was for you guys to hear this thing. I think it sounds amazing, even though it's only making 145 horsepower. All right, this thing's definitely got a rumble to it. I meant to talk a little bit loud, but what we got working against us is there is no padding in the car. The interior's been stripped out. I think he's in the middle of a restoration. Just like a lot of classic muscle car vehicles, I've got no tachometer. Maybe he's gonna add one later on, so you just gotta kind of listen to the sound of the motor. This 289 feels pretty snappy, so whatever rebuild he did on it, really clean, but it's definitely got a little pep to it when you step into the throttle. Now, according to the speedometer, I'm doing about 55. It's a little loud. But is it tolerable for someone, a younger person, who's taking this to shows and enjoying it? Now, as weird as this sounds, I'm not picking up on a ton of drone. What I'm just hearing is the general volume of the exhaust. There's really no reverb, no weird resonance that I hear being translated to the cabin. Right now, it's actually pretty quiet. Let's stomp on it first. that sounds good. That sounds good for a 289. That sounds great. It's definitely a case, though, of a dog that its bark doesn't match its bite. This thing really isn't moving that fast, but it is making quite a ruckus. Impressive. But if you're doing a resto and you want something to enjoy and pull up to shows, that's kind of the idea. It doesn't always have to be the fastest thing around, but if it's got a pleasant and race-sounding tone, and if you go back in the day, like even when they were hot rodding these things, they really weren't that fast. If you were pulling a 13-second quarter mile, I mean, that was flying. So this does feel a little bit snappier than the normal resto 289s that we get in here, the classic cars. And let's feel it one more time. Yeah, it sounds pretty good. I don't know, I'm pretty happy with it. But we're gonna have to see what the customer thinks. So just like I was afraid of, it's a bit loud. Now we get this sort of thing, and it's nice to highlight for you guys. There they go, rip it past. But it's nice to highlight for you guys what happens when we don't exactly get it right, which is why I preference to the customer. I wanted them to come down. I wanted them to hear it at this state. And if there's additional measures we have to do above and beyond to get this thing right for their needs, we can do them at this point. So they're gonna drive it, but I have a feeling it's still a touch loud, although if we do quiet that down a little bit, I have a feeling it's also gonna take away from some of that rawness that it's got at the top end, but you know, there's always a give and take in exhaust. That's why when you come to Fluid MotorUnion, you're getting a result as opposed to a product. We're trying to get you what you're looking for as opposed to just selling you something that we have. And this is sometimes just part of the process. So yeah, a budget build 289 and no performance mods yet, and we still have managed to make it sound like something you'd expect to hear screaming down Mulholland in 1966. Megaphones, side pipes, a little secret sauce from our 7 Things Your Next Exhaust Needs playbook, and suddenly this humble pony has a real voice. Sometimes it's not about chasing horsepower, it's about creating character, and maybe, just maybe, the first mod you should make on a project car is the one that actually makes you want to drive again. So what's the sound you're chasing? Drop your hot take in the comments whether you think side pipes are the peak of taste or a war crime against eardrums. We won't judge. Stay loud, stay rebellious, and we'll catch you next time with a car that probably shouldn't sound as good, but does.